In this episode, we are going to be reviewing Bonnie and Clyde from 1967. This was directed by Arthur Penn and it starred Warren Beatty, Faye Dunaway, Gene Hackman, and Estelle Parsons. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a video YouTube podcast where we explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film. I want to welcome back Toby Rohn, who was on the podcast a couple of times. He wrote this fantastic book on the making of One-Eyed Jacks, A Million Feet of Film, which we discussed last year in length. Highly recommended if you haven't read it yet. And I'll leave the link in the description box to where Toby and I spoke about it. Toby, welcome back. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you. This is always a pleasure.
No, mine as well. So we were talking about Bonnie and Clyde a little bit before we started recording, and I was curious when you first saw the film, how you felt about it then, and has your feelings about it evolved with each viewing?
Well, one thing about this is one of the few movies that everybody in my family loves. So, lots of families, well, ours is, It's a Wonderful Life or Wizard of Oz. Ours are Bonnie and Clyde and Bonnie and Clyde and What's Up, Doc. Those are our two big
families. Yeah.
So,
that's a great one.
That is a great one. And so I have loved this movie since I was a little kid. I saw it way too young. And I loved it. And I have family in Texas, and they told me some stories about, when Bonnie and Clyde were running around Texas, and then that kind of added fuel to it. And so it's just been one of these things, I just can't get rid of it. And every time I see it, I like it more and I find something else in it. So it's just one of those movies that rewatching it pays off every single time.
Yeah, no, I agree, because as we were saying, like it plays on so many different levels. Like it's romantic, it's violent, it's funny, and I haven't seen it a ton of times. I think the last time I saw it was about 10 years ago. Wow. But I remember when I first saw it as a teenager, and I suppose that I'm still, I'm old enough to have been, part of the generation where, you saw things on TV. So I when I really got interested in films, I would go through the TV guide every week and circle everything I wanted to see. And then I would tape it, record it on VHS. And the History Channel here in Canada used to play Bonnie and Clyde sometimes. And I just, as you said before, just visually, it really grabs you. Everything from the production design to the cinematography to the wardrobe. That alone, like the aesthetic, hooks you. I mean, obviously aesthetic is not enough, but the content of the film is so powerful. So I was curious, this film, as we said, it touches on a lot of different feelings. So what do you think, where do you think the heart of the film lies? I mean, what do you think it's truly about?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I think it's place in history, the time that it was made and when it was released, movies where the studio system was dying or maybe dead. New Hollywood was happening and all that other kind of stuff. So I think that drive to do certain things probably shaped it a lot, and you could always go, well, there's Kennedy and there was Vietnam and all these other things that, affected, it affected folks and affected the movies that they made. So there's all that stuff. And I don't know, there had been some previous little gang, return of the gangster type movie things that happened. There was a picture called Young Dillinger with Nick Adams that's surprisingly good. And then in 1957, I believe it is, there's Babyface Nelson. Don Siegel directed it with Mickey Rooney. Yeah, man, that thing is awesome.
I haven't seen either of those. I've been meaning to.
Young Dillinger is out on DVD. Babyface Nelson, unfortunately, is hard to find, but take my recommendation with a grain of salt, man. Don Siegel is one of my idols. So
he's great.
It's a cool movie. Mickey Rooney with a Tommy gun for
I
an
could
hour
see
and a
it.
half, you know.
I could see it because
Yeah.
he was sort of a maniac, right? And
He's good at that. He's really good.
he really was able to bring that into, like, as he got older, like you saw it in some of the darker performances for sure.
It's a shame that there's a lot of those actors from those periods. We now know them for their cheesy movies or their TV stuff, like say Bob Hope and all those terrible specials he did.
Yeah.
But some of their movies were really good, and they were really good actors. Some of them were incredible.
Yeah.
But they're where they stand in cinema history is a little messed up.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. I know what you mean.
But so I don't really, that's an excellent question, and that's one I know, because there's a lot of people who pontificate about this movie all the time, and there was it was certainly influenced by that whole French New Wave thing, with Jules and Jim and those pictures and stuff, and so it's hard to say where it really pans out. To me, as someone who lived or used to spend my summers in those little tiny Texas towns, it has a real nostalgic value because it was made in the 60s and those towns had not changed since the 30s. I mean, you go, and when I went to them a few years ago, they look exactly the same. They still haven't changed. So to me,
interesting. Wow.
Watching Bonnie and Clyde is kind of like going to my grandparents' house. I mean, it looks like those Texas towns, those little tiny towns, Ponder and Red Oak and Venus and Crandall, particularly Crandall, they haven't changed. I mean, and it's a cool look. It's an area that I love. I love those small Texas towns. And so, that's always been my kind of attraction to it. And it's just a damn good movie. And so
it really is. And as I was watching it, what I really took from it was the fact that, these Bonnie and Clyde, the Barrow Gang, Gene Hackman's character, the whole family, Estelle Parsons' character. It's not so much, hey, let's rob banks because we need money. To me, it was more like we want to be somebody. And obviously during the Depression, I mean, they don't go into the backstory of the characters.
No, they don't. They don't really need to. They hint at enough of it that you can get it.
Which I appreciate, because I actually hate when movies draw out every single motivation, like, and spell everything out. And this film just starts and it just goes. I mean, you see Bonnie, Faye Dunaway plays Bonnie off the top, and I like that she's like punching her bed off the top. Like, you get this feeling that she's bored, she's angry, and sure enough, she looks out the window and here's a guy stealing her mother's car. But she's intrigued by him, and they just set off before you know it. And to me, it's just this people who perhaps for whatever reason, likely because of the Depression and their environment, is not having a lot of perhaps opportunity and options, not being well educated, and feeling like we want to be somebody. Because throughout the film, there's so many times where they're taking their pictures and they're sending it into the newspapers, and when they're reading about themselves in the newspapers, they're getting a kick out of it. Like, they were like enjoying doing this. And I think partly it's also like a big FU to the establishment, particularly the scene where they're going into that abandoned house that they were sleeping in, and that those farmers come and they're like, hey, do what you want to do because the bank has taken it from us, and they start just shooting the house. And I just thought, you don't know why those people lost the house. I mean, obviously because of the Depression, and people were not probably getting the help they needed, and the establishment took it. So you don't even need to know. You're just on their side immediately. Right. It just kind of like, and I love that. And I know that Bonnie says a couple of times this, she even says this is not about getting rich. It's about, it's this need to be somebody. It's the need to succeed. It's like the quote unquote, the American dream. Like, it's like, I'm going to succeed at all costs, sort of noirish in that sense. I don't know if that was something that popped out to you.
Well, I know that, there's a lot of people, and you see this today where people grow up in these tiny little towns and they don't have a lot of opportunity, and they just want to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. They just want to see what else is out there. And, there's a scene after they rob the bank which is in Red Oak, where they shot it. But they go to the movies, and and there's that scene where Michael J. Pollard is sitting there crying, and Warren Beatty's really mad at him, and Faye Dunaway's just watching the movie. She wants him to shut up because she's watching the movie. So you kind of get that idea that the glamour of Hollywood and other things had sort of had, you know, done its damage to her, and so her stuck in that little town was just frustrating the crap out of her.
Yeah, and I'm not, you know, I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
So Clyde just represented a possible way of getting out of there. The fact that they were going to be, you know, committing crimes and riding around in the car all the time, you know, that was just sort of what you had to do. But which
I find so fascinating, and I love that movie scene. And you know, Warren Beatty as Clyde, like he's mad because, you know, the other guy parked the car on a which is so funny. As they're robbing a bank, the getaway driver, and he was forced to shoot one of the guys who jumped on the car because it took them a little longer to get away. As a result, he couldn't even get out of the parking spot, you know. And what I find, I'm not sure what movie they're watching. Maybe you know, but you know, it's like the song is like, "We're in the money, we're in the money," and I just thought that's so funny. And then you hear them singing it later, you know. So there's this relationship with like media and celebrity and Hollywood, and like, you know, we'll do anything to basically be famous.
There's a great movie, I think it's great, The True Story of Jesse James from 1957. It was a Nicholas Ray movie.
Oh yeah,
A big part of it is about Jesse James, who's played by Robert Wagner, is starting to believe the press about himself. And I think that Bonnie and Clyde kind of touches on that same thing. You know, they're reading the articles about themselves in the newspaper, and I think it kind of goes to their head. And so, you know, I think that sort of Grapes of Wrath stuff, where they go to all these camps where the folks are, and so that depression thing, they kind of start to see themselves more like sort of Robin Hood type characters than John Dillinger. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing in it. I don't know how much of that they really did. I think they did a little bit of it. The real Bonnie and Clyde, I think they did do some of that because they did follow themselves in the paper. And of course, Clyde wrote a letter to Ford Motor Company in praising the V8 engine because it helped him get away. So, you know, and of course Bonnie's poem, which was, you know, published in the newspapers and stuff.
Which they read in the film.
Which they read in the film. So there's all kinds of that stuff of their sort of reaction to the media. And of course the media, you know, there was a lot of controversy about the media in those days as well. So that's another interesting angle that they toss in there. Yeah,
I mean, and that's like, you know, more relevant now than it was then. Like, you know, like 15 minutes of fame, so to speak. I like, there was even a moment I picked up on that even one of the police officers, at one point he's like in court and he's kind of testifying about what he witnessed in one of the banks, and then they very quickly cut to like photographers taking pictures of him, and he just makes sure he looks good, you know. And again, it's like there's no good guys and bad guys in a way. Like everyone is sort of like falls in the shades of gray. Like everybody wants something from this. And even Clyde at one point, he kind of comments on, oh, well, they just want to make us big so that they're going to look big when they get us. Right. You might be right about that. You know, they're blowing, you know, he felt that they were blowing up everything he did. And in a way they were, because.
And a lot of crimes were attributed to them that they didn't do.
Right. Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. They were blamed for all kinds of things that they didn't do. And so that, you know, continued for, you know, throughout their whole little period there, which was not that long.
That's interesting. Yeah. You know, this relationship between Bonnie and Clyde isn't, you know, because I know that originally, and I know you know this for sure, because I know we'll get to the book you're doing about it. But this, you know, that they were originally going to, in the first draft was that he was bisexual, Clyde. Yes. And then they just thought, you know, maybe we shouldn't go there because we're already doing a lot of controversial things that are going to really provoke people. So they just made him.
Characters seem unsympathetic. I mean, they're, you know, They already play with us big time by making us care about people that we watch mow down the cops. But so yeah, I think they were concerned that adding that to the whole thing would make them just too unsympathetic.
Yeah.
And maybe they were right, especially if you handicap it for when it was made.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is still, before gay rights. This is still the late 60s. Like now that would be totally fine. But at the time, it was like, let's not go there. So they changed it and they made him impotent, which is still sort of ambiguous. Because at first, when here you are with like Faye Dunaway, who's like stunning, and he can't get aroused by her. So even I'm like, all right, maybe he's gay. But what's interesting is as the romance develops, particularly when they're just on their own towards the end, it starts to become sort of sweet, and you start to see more of the love between them. And what's interesting is that when he's finally able to perform sexually with her, it's when he finally discovers and feels that he's a somebody, because they put her poem in the press. So I took that as, maybe this guy who was like in and out of jail had a low self-esteem, low view of, and so when he finally felt successful, he was able to sort of get back to who he was, So I just thought that dynamic was interesting. I don't know what you felt about that aspect.
I've always thought it was really, and like I said, I watched it last night before, so I was due, but it was those scenes are really well done.
I agree.
Like I was telling you earlier, I'm so hung up on the style of it, what it looks like and how it was cut, that a lot of times I forget to pay attention to what the story does. And so last night I was like, wow, that's really well done. And it would, if it was not done well, it could have really drugged the movie down, or just been some dumb thing that, why did they think it was necessary to put that in there? But I think you're right. It sort of does touch on his idea of the media and stuff, and him becoming famous or somebody or whatever, that it sort of relates to that whole part of the story, which makes it work a lot better rather than seem like something that was just tacked on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it brought another dimension into the relationship, because, sure enough, you have to ask yourself, why is this woman following this guy?
Right.
Exactly. She works as, she's a waitress. I mean, they do sort of lean into it, perhaps in, I don't mean this as a criticism, but they do it in a simple way. Whereas like Clyde is, just extremely perceptive, and he's able to just look at her, and like that diner scene early on, he's like, let me guess, you work at a diner and the truckers are asking you for a date, but you don't like them, and you feel like you got nothing going on in your life. And she's like, how do you know that? And he says, I can tell just by looking at you.
That's a great scene. It is great.
And I thought they handled that well, because I think the film needed this sort of, I think if it had a gradual, slower build to develop the relationship, it wouldn't have the feeling of these guys on the run, immediately on the run.
Right.
I think it needed that,
Right. And also we needed something to understand, like you said earlier, why was Bonnie drawn to him?
Yeah.
It seems kind of like a bonehead.
He does.
And so, and Beatty plays that so well. But you see this thing, and he can really sort of read her character, and he has figured her out. And so, then you kind of go, okay, all right. Okay, I can see that a little bit better. He's pretty perceptive after all. Which
I found really fascinating. And I think like it's interesting because that scene is so uncomfortable when like they're fooling around and they're like about to have sex, and then he just pushes away, and then they cut to this great close-up of her just looking so rejected and vulnerable and hurt. It's so uncomfortable. So you think, it's like any other relationship. Like sometimes you may not be getting one thing from your partner, but maybe it's being made up in other ways. And
her
obviously
frustration there is really cool, because it sort of parallels at the beginning of the movie when she's laying in the bed just bored to tears.
Yes. Yeah.
And she's like you said, she pounds on the head on the footboard, I guess. But that same kind of thing, which is, this is just not what I want. And it seems like somebody who is very, very, very determined to get what she wants out of life, one way or
Yeah, exactly. And I couldn't help but wonder. I mean, maybe I'm reading a little too, but because I know they did this with, I mean, this is still during the production code, right? So right before the rating system, and they sort of did play with the sexuality, like with the gun. Like it was almost like she was aroused by the fact that he was good with the gun. You see, like he's like, he takes out the pistol and she touches it. I'm like, okay, that must be coded,
Right.
I thought that was clever, even when he was like showing how good of a shooter he was. I mean, it was so, I mean, you gotta be able to read between the lines. I just love all that because like she wasn't getting satisfied that way, but she was sort of, he was exciting. She was aroused by his violence.
Have you seen Gun Story?
I did. I have. It's been a while, but I've seen
Gun Crazy. I'm sorry, not Gun Story. Gun Crazy. The Joseph H. Lewis movie. That kind of hints at that same sort of aroused by gunplay thing.
Yeah.
And that's just a great movie anyway. But there's a lot of stuff that sort of like Bonnie and Clyde kind of takes Gun Crazy and this runs with it, I think, a little bit.
Yes, exactly.
Like whether they had ever, to me, it looks like it would have been a major influence, but maybe it was not. But it feels like it to me.
I know that that's often considered like a precursor to this. So I imagine it was some. I mean, maybe it was a coincidence, but I imagine it was something they looked at. I know that, like as you said, they were heavily influenced by French New Wave, and when you watch, Breathless, Shoot the Piano Player. It has this sort of rough look. I mean, that has more of a documentary look than Bonnie and Clyde does. Right. But, the editing is choppy and it plays on all kinds of different feelings. Like, I don't know if you've seen Shoot the Piano Player, but that has it's like so funny. And then it's so dark and then it's so dramatic and it goes all over the place with these shifting tones. And I'm sure, originally they wanted Truffaut to direct it. And he pulled out to do Fahrenheit. I always get that film
451.
451. I was gonna say 491. 451, and then I don't know if they don't know if it's true whether the whole story with Godard, asking Godard to do it, and then he wanted to do it in New Jersey. I don't know. It's sort of like no one's sure if that's true. I can't see Godard doing it, to be honest.
One of my favorite stories about Bonnie and Clyde, and I hope it's true. When I get further along with this, I'll have to go dig it out, which was when it played at a festival, I believe in France, and Beatty stayed out in the lobby, I think it was, and the projectionist later said, I sat there and rode the volume knob the whole time because the sound was so screwed up with the guns being so loud. And of course, they had been influenced by Shane, which once Alan Ladd finally fires his gun, about a third of the way in the movie or something like that, it's unbelievably loud.
Yeah.
And so, so there was one of its, big opening engagements, and one of the movie's many stylistic little, purposeful things they did got screwed up by the projectionist. But I was watching it last night, and my wife commented on this, that the dialogue in the early scenes is very, very low. And we wondered if that was done intentionally, for one reason, to make the projectionist crank the sound up so that it would be, because if you set the volume by the guns, you won't be able to hear the dialogue. If you set the volume by the dialogue, then the guns are going to blow your ears out, which is what they wanted. So that's kind of an interesting little thing. I was wondering if it was a trick, because it was, I knew it was going to get loud, but it is very, if you just watch it at normal volume, the dialogue is very low.
Yeah. It is really, I mean, they really cranked that. I mean, they went all out to make, as Arthur Penn said, he wanted the violence to look realistic. And obviously before this, you would see someone with a gun and then they would immediately cut to the person just like falling or getting shot, but you would never see any blood.
See the gun and the person being struck in the same shot.
Exactly. I mean, and the guy who gets shot, the guy who jumps on their car after they rob the bank. I mean that obviously, by the things that we've seen that they do now, I mean, that's pretty tame. But at the time, that was like shot, and I think that may be partly why a lot of the critics tore it up, because I think they were so shocked and so kind of like, this is disgusting, this is just some shoot it up, and they missed all of the content, all of the substance. And I'm so glad that Beatty just like didn't give up on it and pushed for, you know, people to either look at it again. And I know like Pauline Kael gave it a great review, and that was a big help. And Roger Ebert and, you know, major critics. And, you know, I think some people would have probably, I don't know what some other producers would have done. They may have just moved on, but this, he was just that kind of, he is that kind of a guy that was like, no, we're going to re-release it. This is not fair to put it in. I think originally they just put it in some like, you know,
Warner Brothers threw it away because Jack Warner hated it.
He hated it.
And which is, you know, I work in advertising. And so I've always been really fascinated by the campaign, you know, that this was one of those movies where it got tossed out there and some people got it. A lot of people didn't get it. Yeah. And then, you know, it had one of the great movie ad campaigns ever. You know, they're young, they're in love, and they kill people. And it just sort of, you know, they gave it that re-release, and all of a sudden it just went nuts. So that's really, you know, it's one of those great things. And you're right. Thank God Beatty pushed it, because, you know, otherwise we may just ignore it, you know, all these years. But it's one of those movies that was different enough and good enough that I think it would have eventually found its audience anyway, even if it was, you know, 30 years later. But that re-release made sure it got noticed. So that's a great thing.
I love this story. Speaking of Jack Warner, there's so many great stories of these arguments with Beatty, and I love this story. I'm sure you know this, that Arthur Penn told, where after they screened it and he hated it, and then Warren Beatty was like, well, you know, Jack, it's kind of like an homage to the old, you know, 1930s gangster film. And he's like, really? He's like, what the fuck is an homage? I think they just talk about generational gap, right? Just like, what is that? I think that's great.
This is, you know, and it's one of the things that I love about One-Eyed Jacks is One-Eyed Jacks is a movie where acting wise, it was like the new Hollywood, but production wise, it looks like the old Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it sort of has the best of both worlds there. This one is not quite that way, because it's far more to the new Hollywood end of the spectrum. But it does have, with Burnett Guffey, there's enough parts of it here and there where it has that really gorgeous Hollywood studio aesthetic, and not much because they shot it on location and all that other kind of stuff. Right. But it really, at times, it feels like, you know, old Hollywood. And, you know, being that it takes place in the 30s, that seems totally appropriate. Bud Bedecker did a similar thing when he did The Rise and Fall of Legs Diamond, which he shot in black and white and shot it to look real flat, like silent films. And it was done for Warner Brothers, and he had to run in with Jack Warner on that one as well, because it, you know, why does this thing look so flat and terrible, you know? And it, you know, Lucien Ballard shot it, who's one of the greatest cinematographers of all time, and they made it look flat on purpose. And so, you know, there's all these things that just comes, this is just one of those movies. It just is where it existed in time is perfect. And then it just really sort of pulls back and forth between what was coming and what they were all reacting against. And I think there's just enough of the old Hollywood to it to really kind of toss it, you know, really make a big difference. But
no, I agree. And, you know, to me, this is one of the first new Hollywood films. And I think, to me, it may be the first that was really groundbreaking, in the sense that we started to see really dramatic change after this. Like, that's like right after this, the rating system came down. Obviously, Hollywood producers were like, okay, you know, forget the production code. We got to compete with TV. So we got to start showing nudity and violence. Not to say that these films are just that. Obviously, they are a substance, but they have a lot of grit. And then, you know, this when we saw The Wild Bunch, and we saw Easy Rider, and then it went from there. But, you know, just speaking of the cinematography, it's interesting, the scene. I really like the scene where Bonnie suddenly wants to go see her mother, you know, because she says, you know, my mother's getting old, and she's running through the field. And so they go see her family. And I'm not quite sure why he chose to shoot it in this dreamlike sequence. I like the way it looks, but I wonder what he was after emotionally. I don't know if you.
I don't know, but it looks great. And they said I believe Guffey used a window screen the window screen or screen door type metal mesh over the front of the lens to do that. But and that woman that plays her mother was just somebody there from Crandall, Texas, that was on the set. They put her to work. She's great too.
She was really good.
And
I was really impressed with her because I thought she only said like one thing, but it's a pretty decent.
Yeah, she does have some, and she says some pretty prime stuff, you know, where she says, if y'all, get too close to me, you won't live, because the cops were watching them. But they did, Bonnie and Clyde really did that stuff. They would periodically go meet their family in these weird hidden secret locations and hang out and have picnics and stuff. And so, in the movie, they only do the one, but they did do that. And that was a rock quarry outside Crandall, Texas, is where they shot that.
It's interesting. It's interesting.
Crandall was one of the big locations.
Yeah. What I like so much about that scene is that, there's no sentimentality. Like there's no like good, like, oh, I hope that nothing is going to happen to you, and like tears or anything. Like the mother's just like, okay, I'll see you later. Like she just and you see Faye Dunaway is kind of stunned, kind of like, why, why is my mother not more concerned or upset or, she's like, well, you can't stay too close to me because they'll definitely find you here. So you guys better just keep on going. And then at the same time, everybody in the family's looking at the newspapers like, oh my God, yeah. It's like they're so impressed that they're in the paper. I mean, everyone is so innocent. So it plays on like, it's like this sad yet funny scene at the same time, well, but it's bleak. It's just bleak.
Yeah. It's interesting to me how you watch how at the beginning, they're so hopeful. She just wants to go and ride around and do things, and they, think they're going to be somebody. And then by the end of the movie, like this scene really is where it sort of shifts gears, where they know they're not coming out of this.
Right.
And they know that riding around in these cars is going to be the rest of their life. And she has that great line toward the very end where she says, and I thought we were going someplace, and now we're just going.
Yeah.
And so that's, which in a way, it kind of, this movie last night when I was thinking about it, kind of reminded me of the sort of the way things move in The Wild Bunch, where you've got these guys who they know their time is up. And so when the big scene comes where they're going to die, they know. And so the way scene here where Beatty and Dunaway lock eyes for a split second before all hell breaks loose.
Oh yeah.
Is so powerful. And then a similar scene in The Wild Bunch where they're all standing there and the guys look back and forth, and then they start trying to, start blowing everybody away. But it's just that sort of fatalistic thing, and then this realization that this is it. This is over right here, and they handle it so well. I don't know what that is about the times, 66 to 68, right in there, I guess Vietnam or whatever it was that gave people that sort of attitude. But these movies really do a great job with it.
Yeah, no, well said. That's what I always find interesting about some of these, when your protagonists are criminals doing all these terrible things, but yet, sometimes you do find you are on their side at times, and you like them to an extent, or you sympathize with them because it is done with like the utmost empathy. And but at the same time, you I don't know why you sort of it's something about people kind of trying to survive on the outside. It's not trying to survive outside of the establishment and sort of like, I'm not going to play by your rules. I think people sort of appreciate, like we all kind of want that in ourselves. So we'll find our feelings about these kind of characters kind of goes back and forth. I don't know if that was your experience.
This is definitely an outsider movie for sure.
Yeah.
And The Wild Bunch would be too. So maybe that was part of it. Maybe there's a lot of those movies came out of that time. The 70s certainly a lot of them.
Oh yeah. And like I said, this was one of the first. And I love when we see Gene Hackman and Estelle Parsons, because what's so interesting about when now there's four of them, and we just see some scenes where they're hanging out and stuff, and like Bonnie can't stand them, but you get the sense that she's little more sophisticated, a little smarter than everybody. You know, she's interested in art. She writes poetry.
Right.
She's actually the one who really realizes that they're doomed, where no one else seems to realize this.
Right. And they just, you know, one thing that struck me last night was the scene where Clyde is robbing a grocery store. And out of the blue, that guy shows up with the meat cleaver and starts fighting.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he bashes the guy in the head with his gun, the butt of his gun, and so he gets away. And as they're tearing away, he was like, he couldn't believe the guy attacked him.
Yeah, he felt bad. He had to hit him.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not against him.
Yeah.
And so it's like he really didn't seem to see that what he was doing was wrong. And I guess in those times, in the Depression, you know, people did what they had to do to survive. So maybe there was a little bit of that was actually going on with folks. But, you know, he seemed really shocked that the guy would not let him rob his store.
Well, that's what's so interesting, is like that was one thing that popped out to me, because again, I hadn't seen it in about 10 years, and I was like, wow, yeah, like they're not the smartest people. And at the same, I mean, obviously they were somewhat street smart because they're capable of doing what they were doing. But particularly when Estelle Parsons and Gene Hackman comes in, because they're sort of like, as you know, Bonnie, I know at one point she's like, all these hillbillies that she refers to them. But they're so funny. And what's, you know, this is another thing with the humor. And when you think of like Gene Hackman and, you know, even Warren Beatty, I mean, Estelle Parsons obviously has done a lot of comedy, but also a lot of drama. But she's known, you know, more for comedy, like Roseanne and so many shows. But Gene Hackman, you know, other than like, we didn't really see him, like he's kind of funny in some things, but he's usually very dramatic and intense. It wasn't really until like the Royal Tannenbaums that we started to see a more comedic side, but he's hilarious in this. I mean, he was killing me. The story with the cow he told like a couple of times. And I just, you know, I don't know. And Estelle Parsons with that scream, I mean, God, she was just so funny. I mean, I'm curious who stands out to you the most in this film?
Gosh, that could be it. And again, this is one of those movies where
kind of everybody, right?
Yeah, you know, one time you watch it and you just, you know, really pay attention to Faye Dunaway, or one time you just realize how brilliant that Beatty is in it. It sort of bounces. Everybody's so good. I mean, even Gene Wilder in his small scene.
Yes, that's great.
Really good.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that was his first film, and you look at it and he goes, he was just being Gene Wilder.
Yeah.
You know, that way he gets Gene Wilder's, you know, he goes from 0 to 60, both with his intensity and his volume, you know, that he does so well in Young Frankenstein, or you know, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. He does that so well, and here it is here, but you know, you would have never known. That was just, you know, you didn't pay attention to it. It's just, what is this guy?
Well, I loved his timing. When he was like, when they take his car, and he's like, I'm gonna tear them apart. And then his wife is like, oh, maybe they have guns. He's like, well, let's just turn back.
Exactly.
Like the timing was, and I remember the scene, but I don't, you know, it's interesting. Like you said, like you have all these kind of different experiences emotionally with this kind of film, because it plays on, you know, maybe depending on your mood, right? It plays on so many different levels. But the only one, and this is not to criticize her, but I don't think that she was meant to be comedic, was Bonnie. I mean, she's more of the one who's sort of judging everybody for being kind of kooky.
Right, exactly. It's funny, the movie seems to revolve around her.
Yeah.
You know, we think of it as Warren Beatty's picture, but she's sort of the hub that everything spins around. You know, she's the one that realizes that they're in a dead end. You know, all that kind of stuff. So it's really Bonnie's movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
It was, you know, they went through a lot to try to cast that part. I'm so glad that she got it, because she's so perfect. She is so perfect.
She's so good. I mean, she's really good. I thought she's a great.
She's really great in Network, and
so many films in the 70s.
Yeah, there's a picture called Oklahoma Crude with her and George C. Scott that I always really liked.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It's pretty good.
I'll have to check that one out. And then, of course, you know, there's Dub Taylor. I love. I mean,
I do too. That's one thing that's interesting, is that both Denver Pyle, who plays Frank Hamer, and Dub Taylor, who plays Michael J. Pollard's dad. they were both, character actors from 50s Westerns, so, Dub Taylor was a sidekick in a lot of those kinds of movies. So it was kind of interesting to see, them get this kind of part. And of course, Dub Taylor's also in The Wild Bunch. He's the temperance guy at the beginning when everybody gets. But and of course, Denver Pyle would go on and do Dukes of Hazzard and stuff. But it's really interesting to see those guys, go from those 50s Westerns parts to all of a sudden here they are in these really great character parts. And it always blows me away that Dub Taylor's character seems more upset that Michael J. Pollard got a tattoo than he does that they're riding around robbing banks and killing people.
That's a good point. It didn't dawn on me.
The thing is, why did you get a tattoo?
Yeah, yeah. He was smart in the sense that he was so nice to Bonnie and Clyde intentionally, so they wouldn't suspect, because he's probably thinking, I gotta get these guys out of here, right? And of course, he makes that deal with Denver. Not deal, but they do make a deal, because obviously Michael J. Pollard's character Moss, C.W. Moss, would have went to jail too. So
they say that in the movie that they talk about how he was going to get just 2 years, and that the deal was do not get in the car. Yeah, when they leave the town, do not get in the car.
Yeah, that's a great scene. And one thing that I know we all do this. Well, maybe I shouldn't say everyone does it, but I know I'm guilty of this. Is we always talk about like the cast and the director, but I don't know what it is with, maybe it was when people started talking about the auteur theory and they're thinking that the director does everything, and it's not true. It takes a team of people. And of course, you got to talk about D.D. Allen, who was the editor. And, looking at her filmography, I knew that she had done some classics, but every single majority of her films that she edited are masterpieces. And I've reviewed some of them: Odds Against Tomorrow, Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico, Reds, The Hustler, Slapshot, Breakfast Club. Wow. It's just unbelievable.
I forgot that she cut Slapshot. I forgot about that.
Yeah. And that's just to name some of them. She was, wow. And of course, that the scene that people talk about the most is the last scene with the murder. And that was, obviously it's her and Penn making decisions, but it goes so fast that I forget that some of those shots are slow motion, like as Beatty's getting shot, and and then they cut back and forth to fast, slow, fast, but it feels fast. But at the same time, you feel it in your gut because of that slow motion. I know he got that from Kurosawa in Seven Samurai. He was saying that he did that in that film. That's just, I don't know if that was, something that popped out to you just in terms of the slow mo and the cutting back and forth.
I hate slow motion in movies, pretty much across the board. I just think it kills the pace or whatever momentum you've got going, unless you know what you're doing.
It's hard to do it really well. It's hard. I know Scorsese does it really well, but it's really hard to do well.
Yeah. Of course, Peckinpah was probably the king of it.
Yeah.
But this movie, I think the way they do, you don't even think about it in this one. Where, with Peckinpah, you kind of see how his style works, and you slow things down because otherwise they're going to happen so fast you don't see them. And so, but this one, it's cut so perfectly, and so it's so effective, and it seems 10 times longer than it actually is, which is one thing I noticed last night. I was like, wow, that is over before you even know it.
Yeah.
But it is so etched in your head. It's kind of like the shower scene in Psycho.
Yeah.
There's a jillion shots in that little thing, and it runs so fast. Yeah. It makes a giant impression that the whole movie sort of hinges around it. But in this one, it is so fast and so loud and so intense. And then everything just stops. To the point that the movie doesn't even fade away. It just goes black.
Yeah. It just the end.
That's it. And it's just, so I think that decision, that's we don't think about that, but that decision, let's don't fade it out. Let's don't bring the titles up over the top of it. Let's just cut off and go black. And that really is sort of adding a little punctuation to what we just watched, because, in 67, people's, mouths were open, stuck to the sticky floor of the movie theater,
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, not only did they just do that, but then they don't even bother to end the movie right. It just stops.
Yeah.
And so that's just another thing, it's just, and it's perfect. It's perfect. All those decisions were perfect. And I there's not many movies that where you don't go, well, maybe they should have done that a little different, or maybe they should have done this. But this one just rings true. It turned this and Beverly Hillbillies turned me into a bluegrass fan. I mean, the music is so well done.
So great.
And so there's stuff like that. There's just 1,000 things that this movie did that just every creative decision seems to have been the right one, from casting to some of those plot decisions like we were talking about with the bisexual thing, tossing that in favor of the impotences. All these other things, everyone seems to be the right one. To go shoot it in those real towns versus on sets. It would have been really easy to make that movie on the back lot.
But and it would have not felt the same at all. I know that they partly did that because they knew they didn't want Warner Brothers up bugging them.
Exactly. But the thing that's cool about it is, and it's part of the humor in the movie, is the way the people talk, the townspeople and stuff, when they have, they don't have a lot to do, but when they do, they are very real.
It's very authentic. Yeah. I like that.
Look great. There's those faces. They don't look like Hollywood faces. That's one thing. Bonnie's mom, that woman, she would never have made it as an actress, but she's perfect in this one little scene.
Yeah. Same with the farmers, the guys who shoot the house that the bank took. I love those two guys. I mean, right away, just those. I mean, you really only saw like European filmmakers doing that. They would use professional and non-professional. And then some American filmmakers have done it, but this film utilized that, perfectly. And I'm sure Arthur Penn was a big help. I mean, he was an actor. He was part of the Actors Studio. He was an acting teacher. So he knew how to work with actors, and I'm sure he was able to work with them really, really well.
It's also interesting that for a movie that romanticizes the characters and becomes, and you could, I'm sure that was on purpose, but you could go, well, it's not a very authentic depiction of Bonnie and Clyde, which of course, okay, so what? Yeah. But at the same time, a lot of the aesthetics and the feel of the towns and everything else, they get it absolutely perfect. As a guy from the South, I cannot stand fake Southern accents. They drive me nuts. But this movie, they're all right on. They're dead on. And I used to stay in those kinds of towns. I know what those towns look like and what they feel like, and that the movie's spot on with those as well. And so it's just one of those things. It just gets everything right. So
absolutely. So why did you want to write a book on this now after the One-Eyed Jack's book? So what is it about this?
I love making of movie books. I've always loved that, the production history kind of stuff. And this is a movie that I've loved since I was a little kid. And I used to spend my summers in a little tiny Texas town that felt like these towns. It was near Ranger, Texas, where the Bonnie and Clyde robbed the National Guard armory and got a bunch of the weapons that they used to outgun the cops. And my grandpa used to tell me about that and show me the old highway that they used to tear up and down. And so I always had this real kind of fascination with Bonnie and Clyde. And then being a little budding movie geek, I really latched onto the movie. And all my life, I used to say, I'm going to find these locations. I'm going to get a list of them and get a map and go look at all of them. I'm going to find all of them. And never did. And then luckily my family loves the movie as much as I do, and they wanted to do it too. And so our last vacation before COVID hit, we went to Texas, went to the town where my grandparents lived and all that kind of stuff. But we spent an entire day, and it's kind of these little towns sort of are in like a ring around Dallas. And we went to most of them. We didn't get all of them, but we went to most of them, Crandall and Ponder and Red Oak and some of the others. And it just seeing that stuff and seeing how they had not changed. I mean, the reason they used them is because they looked like the 30s, but here it was the 2000s and they still look like they looked in the 60s, doubling as the 30s. They look the same. And so as we were riding around to these places, and I talked to a few people, and they would tell me stories about them or their family members or whatever being there. And I thought, this is a movie that's been written about endlessly. There's not much that you could say about it other than, boy, it's really good, and all this other stuff. And a lot of the stories that you and I've been talking about, Jack Warner hating it and the re-release, the second push with it and all those things. But here's something that you didn't hear a lot about, was that these people in these towns, they stood there and they fed these people and they let them use their houses. And so I thought, wow, what a neat idea. And I've been trying to find people and get their stories for a book about sort of a real sort of just sort of take for granted the idea that it's this, revolutionary movie that changed everything, and just go, they had to actually go make this thing like they make every other movie. And so here they're going to these dinky towns, and all these Texas rednecks were standing around and watching it. And I've interviewed a lady, her family owned the house that Gene Wilder and Evans are sitting on the porch of when their car is stolen. That was their house. And that was in Crandall, Texas. And they shot a lot of the movie around Crandall, Texas, the rock quarry scene with Bonnie's mom, and the scenes at the end at the ice cream parlor and all that stuff right before Bonnie and Clyde are killed. Those were all shot in and around Crandall. And so I interviewed this woman, and it was wonderful. She told me some great stuff. And so I just thought, this is I find it fascinating. I hope other people do. That if I can get enough stuff, it'd be a really interesting book about the nuts and bolts in Texas of making this movie. And it just was a lot. It's just something that's been a lot of fun. And I've been trying to collect stories and see what we can make of it. It was interesting when we got to Crandall, we did our little day trip, we pulled up on Main Street, pulled up to this, parked right there on the main drag there in town. And we're like, well, okay, some of it was shot around here. And my daughter looked down the street, down this sidewalk, and instantly saw just some of the little architectural details that were, from the ice cream parlor and some of this. I mean, it was so obvious, and it had not changed a bit. And
that's so interesting to me that it looks the same.
It's exactly the same. The water tower's still there. The bank in Ponder, which is the bank that they robbed, where the bank had failed, the first bank they robbed, where they go in and there's no money.
Oh, and there's no money there. Yeah.
That's Ponder, Texas. And that bank is still there, still sitting on the corner.
Wow.
And if you look inside, the teller windows and stuff are the same.
That's amazing.
And so the cracks in the plaster on the old walls, it seems the same. I mean, it hasn't changed at all. But they filmed a lot of that around that area. And there's a steak restaurant there called Cattleman's or Ranchman's, one or the other, I can't remember now. And they catered it. And so there's a lot of stuff, stories about it there. And it was a huge deal for, these little dinky towns to get a movie crew to show up. And so there's a lot of, local newspaper stuff and things like that about it. So it's just really interesting.
That's fascinating. I wonder if they've shot anything else in these towns.
I don't know. I think
Westerns over the years, or
I think they did. I know that Ranchman's restaurant, John Wayne ate there over the years and stuff like that. It was, kind of known. But I don't know about other movie stuff. But I'll send you, if you want, I'll send you some of my photos that we took when we did our little trip.
I'd love to see it.
Stick them in there. It's really cool. It's really, really cool.
Yeah. No, I'd love to see that. I can put it in the video as well. So
if anybody out there, if your aunt or uncle or grandmother has anything to do with Bonnie and Clyde, let me know.
Get in touch with Toby.
Get in touch with me. I would love to interview you.
Yeah.
I've got a couple, and I need a lot more. So
I think that's a great idea for a book. Yeah, because it's true. Like there are a lot of great books about the making of a movie, but like, what about the story? What about those kind of towns that perhaps are not movie towns, that a film like this that is so iconic? Like, how did people respond? Like, were they an extra in it? Like, did they just happen to maybe walk by? Like, I think that's a great idea. So
There's one
I
of
hope
them,
you can meet more people.
yeah, one old man who's one of the people who is in the bank when it's robbed. He was just some guy, and the clothes that he wears are his clothes. He looked enough like 1934 in 1966 that they just stuck him in the back. And I believe that someone in his family, he's gone now, but someone in his family said that they kept those overalls that he wore in the movie. Wow. They still got them in the families. It's just really interesting. But we see a lot of these movies, like, and this is a great example of it. It's just this thing, and it's so huge, and you kind of lose the sight of, people had to actually go make this. They went and they set up all the lights and everything like every other movie, and they did it. And in this one, they, location filming was not, it was certainly had been done quite a bit, but it was not to the extent that we see, today. And so it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. No, definitely. Well, I hope, like I said, I hope you meet more people. And where's the best place for people to contact you? Was it your blog?
I will send you the link. I set up a Facebook page for it.
Okay.
I did my One-Eyed Jacks book. I did the same thing with a Facebook page.
That's how I heard about it. I remember.
And I actually found, some of the interviews, a few interviews I got for the One-Eyed Jacks book came from people commenting on the Facebook page. So that worked out really well that time. So I set up one this time as well, and have tried to reach out to some of those towns, to their Chamber of Commerce or whatever, and see if I can get some traction that way. So
that's great. That's
okay. Once I finished my 50s Westerns book, is it's rounding second, heading towards third now, and so when that one's done, this will be the next one.
Okay. That'll be really great too. When are you hoping to have that done, or is it hard to say?
It's hard to say. I'm able right now. I'm able to work on it pretty consistently, which is great, because a lot of I've moved and done other things, changed jobs and things, and then always just put it in on the back burner. But right now it's full speed ahead. So
great.
But hopefully soon.
Great. Good to hear. Okay. Well, I'll leave the link in the description box below to both the 50s Westerns blog, which is Toby's Westerns blog, which is fantastic, and the Facebook page, the Bonnie and Clyde book, where you can get in touch with him just if you want to follow it in general, or also if you know anyone who was there, or if you were there, or your grandfather or great grandfather, maybe you can get in touch if you know any stories, because I'm sure Toby wants to hear it. So
I do. And snapshots, and I know there's some of those out there. I got outbid on some on eBay about 10 years ago, and man, I hate that. Somebody had taken a bunch of pictures of all the cars and stuff sitting around.
Oh wow.
Man, I would kill to have those things. But anyway, so yeah, if you got anything, let me know. Let's make this thing really cool.
Excellent. Well, Toby, thanks again for coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk film with you, and your books and your blog and everything. So thanks so much. So please come again sometime.
Absolutely. Anytime. Just say the word.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you are interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to patreon.com/RobertBellissimo@the-movies for full details. Patreon is bonus content created by me, which is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month, which you will vote on, which means you will be very much included in part of the decision making as to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. Having an income from Patreon will also give me the flexibility to do even more videos, which of course are absolutely free to view on YouTube, as well as the audio version of my podcast. So head over to patreon.com/RobertBellissimo@the-movies for full details. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of the podcast and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I've ever recorded can be found, youtube.com/RobertBellissimo@the-movies. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner right here to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.